to update the packages. And now we're propelled into a wizard. This is a first-time wizard, so you won't see this on subsequent boot-ups. It welcomes us. Let's click forward. We need to agree to the license agreement, otherwise we'll be unable to use the operating system. Whether or not a firewall is enabled, it's enabled by default and it permits SSH connectivity. Initially, I like to start off with disabled and then manually disable the ports that are not necessary, or enable ports that are necessary. So we'll disable the firewall and move forward. Otherwise, the default configuration, as you saw, will permit only SSH connectivity. You can turn on other connectivity such as FTP mail, etc. However, the default is to enable SSH. So let's disable the firewall for now. We do look at IP tables in the security section. And it tells us the security level will be lower. And we'll just indicate yes. What SE Linux policy you'd like. Enforcing is set to the default, or as the default. Permissive and disabled are other options. And it tells you above that it provides, SE Linux that is, provides a finer grained security over the system by setting policies, extended attributes, and so on. It tells you the states it can be set up in, disabled, which only warns about things which would be denied, so you have a sense for how you could implement SE Linux. A fully active state, which is the enforcing state. Let's go ahead and just leave it on disabled for now. We'll click on forward and tell it yes. It tells us that the system needs to be relabeled. And there's a crashing dump utility which allows us to capture items that have been dumped by the OS if the system crashes, in particular by the kernel. It tells us kdump will capture that information, and it can be used to determine why your system crashed. For mission-critical applications that can afford little to no downtime, it's a good idea to enable the kdump facility. Just go ahead and turn it on, enable kdump. You need to indicate the kdump memory, so the amount of memory that kdump can use to capture this information, and the usable system memory. It is resource intensive, by the way, so the more memory you have, the better. Otherwise, disable kdump, and if the system's not a mission critical system, then disable it altogether. It tells you here that changing the settings requires rebooting the system so that the memory can be reallocated so that kdump can get a portion of that memory, and asks us would we like to continue and reboot the system after first boot is complete. We'll just say yes. Now we need to set the date and time, and that looks correct. Next window we have network time protocol. We can enable a network time protocol. Lookup list, we'll turn it on here, and it references pools of servers, Red Hat based servers, under pool.ntp.org. You can also add NTP servers in your environment by indicating, for example, we'll indicate the IP address of the all-purpose infrastructure server, which provides NTP services again as well, and that's a 192.168.75.100 system. So this is an internal system that can be added to the list of systems. When you press enter, it checks to see whether or not the system is reachable, whether or not NTP is running on the system. If it doesn't find it, it will come back momentarily and tell you that there has been a problem finding it. Now that can be for one or more reasons, including, but not limited to, an inability to connect to the network. So we'll just go ahead and tell it yes anyway to keep it there, because we know the server is an NTP server, and we'll resolve the network connectivity issues later. And here it's going to try to connect to the NTP servers, and NTP has built-in redundancy and facilities to handle the inability to connect to servers. So it'll connect to only those servers that it's able to connect to, all built into the protocol. Here we can register the system. We'll tell it no, not at this time. Again, doesn't suit our intents and purposes at this particular time. tells us or prompts us with whether or not we're sure we don't want to connect to the Red Hat network because of the following: security and updates, downloads, support, compliance. We'll just say no thanks at this stage. But again, for your production systems, definitely register them with Red Hat and pay the subscription fee. It tells you won't be able to receive software updates. There are other updates online, Yum repositories that you can use to update your software, but you won't get updates from Red Hat directly unless you have an active subscription. Let's click on forward to move to the next step. Now we need to create at least one user can be used, just like with other Linux distros. So we'll create a username Linux CDT with a default password. And if you want to use network authentication such as Kerberos or NIS, then you click on the network login button and indicate the realm and applicable information. Now here it says it's detected an audio card, although it's a server that shouldn't have it, and I don't think it actually does, so it may be misdetecting the audio card. Now it tells us the system must be rebooted, and then we'll finally be in our new environment. So let's click on OK. Now we're rebooting again. So the backplane and server detection process will continue as usual. We'll be presented with the grub menu, the handoff from the BIOS to the grub bootloader, and then from grub, the setup of the initial RAM disk, then access to the base file system, then a subsequent load of drivers necessary to access the remainder of the file systems, and then a subsequent boot of the operating system, which includes setting up the host name, IP address, IPv6 information if applicable, amongst other things such as services. And Pixie boot. And we're booting again after the main menu. UDEV, Universal Devices, is starting. We've got the full graphical environment with services coming up, most of which are okay. One just popped by with a warning. And now we're up in full graphical mode. This is the interface which allows us to log in and make use of the system. Again, there are multiple consoles available, Control-Alt F1 through 6, and this is Control-Alt F7. So if we log in as the user, Linux CBT, the non-privileged user that is, we'll be able to access the system. In addition, we should also note that there are options below such as languages. You can change the language that's used to access this interface. Many languages are supported. We'll cancel. Session information. You can log into different desktop types if they're available. Or if for some reason GNOME doesn't start, a failsafe terminal, or just use the last session if GNOME or your desktop did start. You may restart the system by clicking on Restart, and since we're at the console it doesn't prompt us. We also shut down the system by clicking on Shutdown. In both cases you have to, of course, confirm. So let's log in, and now we're being propelled into a full Red Hat Enterprise desktop, in this case server, but it's a desktop that's useful. So we can interact, open a terminal, look at the layout of the file system using df-h, and as you can see, our disk was configured into a logical volume presented by devmapper volume group 0, logical volume 0. 98 gigs were provisioned, 2.5 were used in this installation, 91's available. So the default file system layout creates one large root file system, a small, in this case, 100 megabyte boot file system to store the kernel and other boot related items, as well as a swap partition, which we can reference using the swap command, but we'll look at later on. So we're up and running, and this is a full-fledged system. Let's check its IP configuration using sbin IP, or ifconfig that is. It is set to 195. You can try to communicate sending 3 packets out to perhaps the default gateway located at 1. and in this case it doesn't respond. So chances are either the wrong interface is plugged into the wire, or the interface is plugged into the wrong VLAN, which we'll sort out later on. So we've installed using the CDs 1 of 5, or the CDs 1 through 5 using 1 through 3. We're up and running. We're going to look at other installation methods momentarily.